Hi, this is Tom. Welcome to my channel. There's an app here I'll put in the description of the video that has talks about three Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels. And this looks really good on a desktop. It looks so on a phone. If you're interested, I'll give the URL on the description of the video. And I'm going to look at Mark here for a few minutes. So I'll open Mark. And here, this is done by Gemini 3. And he had mostly free reign. And I just asked for things that would be interesting to show about the gospel. And there were a few things I thought were very interesting. Here we got a map about the journeys, and here it talks about the structure. There's the dividing line, where in the first part, you have Jesus as the servant who heals and has reign over nature and demons, and then the suffering servant in the second half, divided by Peter's confession, "Thou art the rock," or Jesus says to Peter, "Thou art the rock," and Peter confesses, "Thou art the Christ." And then here we've got a little bit about Mark, the author. Now I wanted to spend a little bit of time here because I thought this was really the coolest part that he came up with. So it talks about how Mark would have a story bracketed by events. And the bracketing story would give meaning to the event in the middle. So the example that explains is the fig tree and the temple. So you have Jesus curses the fig tree, and then he cleanses the temple, and they come back and they find that the tree is dead. Excuse me, and the meaning is the temple is the fruitless tree. I thought this was so cool. Really neat. You have the meaning of the event is highlighted by what's bracketing it in the story. And by the way, Daniel does that. In the book of Daniel, where you'll have these prophecies and then stories. Like Daniel in the lion's den, there's different stories, and the stories help explain the prophecies. And so this is kind of a similar concept here. So I like this so well, I asked Gemini to do another one. So it did this one with sandwiches, and it has the plot to kill Jesus, bracketing the woman anointing Jesus, where she was preparing him for the burial. And then you have this second one where Jesus was mocked by the soldiers as King of the Jews, and then Pontius Pilate had the sign put on saying this was the King of the Jews. And in the middle, you have the crucifixion. And so the explanation given was that you have Jesus mocked as King of the soldiers and labeled by Pontius Pilate, the King of the Jews. The cross in the middle, the cross becomes the true throne of God. Very nice thought, and really neat. And there's quite a few of these. I just had to show a few of these, but if you're interested, you could have the AI go into listing like all of the ways where Mark used this mechanism. Very neat. Then here we have characters that were involved in the story, and the point is made that the demons and the Gentiles and the centurions, so these are outside, in the outer circle, they often correctly identify Jesus, whereas the insiders appeared remarkably dense. So that was an interesting point that was made, that could have been an idea of Mark, sort of highlighting how Jesus is recognized by those you might not expect, whereas those that were closer to him were slower to figure it out. And then here we have in the Greek, let me come back to, I think it was this one. It says that Mark used the present tense, Jesus says versus Jesus said, to make the action feel immediate. And then here in the Greek key, these are some Greek words that were used very frequently. And you have the word euthys that was used 42 times, which is translated or can be immediately. And so here we have Mark creating a sense of urgency. And so that was an interesting idea about Mark's gospel, that things are happening very quickly. And his attempt to, in his language, to convey action throughout. On here, this tab, we're seeing that 3 times Jesus predicted his death, and then you had kind of negative responses from the disciples, where Peter says, "May it never be," and another one they're arguing about who was the greatest, and then you have James and John, they're asking, to have a special place at Jesus' side. So all of these are negative responses to what Jesus was telling them about what would happen. And here the point was, it highlights how difficult it was for them to accept a suffering Messiah. And we see this concept throughout Israel as a whole. You see it in the disciples, and also in Israel as a whole. And here we have, it's talking about how it's emphasized in Mark how Jesus would do things and then say, don't say anything about this. And it points out that the Messiah was a military conqueror to them, and he had to redefine the world before he could accept the title. So that's an interesting interpretation. I think another one that makes more sense to me, not saying that this isn't possible, but I think what was the most pressing reason was that at the beginning, if it were to become known, Jesus' identity or role as Messiah, that it would have brought opposition. Would have brought opposition from the Romans, was a primary consideration, or a primary one. Another big consideration was it would have brought opposition, has actually happened, from the leaders, the religious leaders. And so he worked in a way that was more low-key to prolong. He knew that this would happen. He talked about it. But to give more time to develop his work. And then finally it ends with the commission. So I'm going to end the video here. But if you're interested, you can go to the hub and look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And you just click on whichever one you're interested in, and then you can back arrow to get back to the hub. And once again, I will put the URL in the description of the video. And thanks for watching. Until next time.